Hey everybody, it's Zach, and have I got an ultimate guide to the awesome for you. Today, we're kicking it old school. How old? Well, pull up a chair, and I'll tell you all about a time a long, long time ago. Back before even your grandpa was around. Oh, this must have been about 65 million years ago, roundabouts, I reckon. A fella by the name of Rex was big back then. Tyrannosaurus Rex, he called himself. Stomping around the world like he owned the place. Old Rex was living a dream. But then, something went wrong. Most say it was a fire come from the sky. Turn old Rex's dream into a nightmare. Well, sir, next thing you know, old T-Rex was gone. And the world was never the same. So pack your bags. It's time to hop into the time machine, because we're going on the ultimate guide to the awesome, T-Rex style. "65 million years ago, the world was a highly swampy place. Perfect stomping grounds for Tyrannosaurus Rex. In the prehistoric world, the large were in charge, and T-Rex was one of the biggest things to hit since the Big Bang. And most people say, the nastiest. With mega muscles and tons of teeth, pretty much the only dino willing to take on a T-Rex was another T-Rex. As they battled it out in the swamps of Prehistoria, the world's first mud wrestlers had no idea that lurking right around the corner was an opponent that was too much even for them. Extinction. The ultimate killer got these giants by the throat and finished them off, never to be seen again. Until about 100 years ago, that is. That's when the first T-Rex bones were discovered here, in the Badlands of North America. Sure is a lot less swampy these days. Buried in these rocks are major clues to the case of the vanishing king of the dinosaurs. This is Phil Curry. He's a paleontologist who knows exactly why the Badlands are oh so good for finding T-Rex fossils.
The thing that allows Tyrannosaurus to be preserved in this part of the world is the fact that they were living on a coastal lowland, and there was a tremendous amount of sediment coming in from the mountains that were rising to the west at that time. So there were large rivers running across the coastal lowland, and if the Tyrannosaurus body happened to fall in the water, then it had a very good chance of being buried complete. And fast burial is one of the most critical factors in terms of preserving an animal that large.
So where was all this fast burial happening? With the extreme fossil focus of the Mega Magnifier, Phil's gonna draw us a map.
So far, 17 skeletons of Tyrannosaurus have been found, all of them from Wyoming north into Alberta and Saskatchewan. Now, Tyrannosaurus probably had a much more extensive range than that. It almost certainly lived all the way from the Arctic Ocean down to the Gulf of Mexico.
Say what? Did Phil say 17 skeletons? But the world's leading T-Rexperts say millions of the beasts ruled Earth during their reign of pain. It's no wonder the lifestyle of T-Rex, no matter how famous, is still such a mystery. Even bone buffs like Phil Curry have only scratched the surface of what might be out there. I mean, no one even knew T-Rex existed until 1902. That's when a bone hunter from the state of Kansas made a discovery that would rock the world. Barnum Brown was working for the American Museum of Natural History when a bone being used as a paperweight caught his eye. Was it from a rare, giant, meat-eating dino? Barnum traced the bone back to a place called Hell Creek. Pardon my French. It was smack dab in the middle of rough, tough Montana, but Barnum loved a challenge. So the man known as Mr. Bones caught the next train west and started digging. And for the next 6 years, Barnum Brown and his team dug and dug and dug. They found lots of broken bone bits, but nothing that would prove Barnum's hunch. He'd sure gotten off to a rocky start. But then, in 1908, he struck fossil gold. Mr. Bones had done it. He discovered the almost intact skeleton of a meat-eating monster who hadn't been seen in nearly forever. Tyrannosaurus Rex was back with a vengeance. Next stop, New York City. Brown's boss at the museum, Henry Fairfield Osborn, named the new dino Tyrannosaurus Rex, which means Tyrant Lizard King in Latin. Osborn couldn't wait to show Rex off, so while the bones were being cleaned up, he had these models built. Here's how Osborn described the new beast in town.
Long, powerful hind legs carried the body upright, balanced by a long tail. The massive head was armed with 13 dagger-like, saw-bladed teeth in each jaw. The Tyrannosaurus was capable of destroying any of the contemporary creatures, and was easily the king of the period and monarch of its race.
And this is how people saw the T-Rex for more than 50 years. But our imaginations still ran wild. 1915 was the start of T-Rex mania. The Tyrant Lizard King even became a movie star. Okay, so special effects weren't too evolved back then. But to the ancient humans of 1915, T-Rex was a horror story they could definitely sink their teeth into. Here in modern times, the search for the true story of T-Rex never stops. Not far from Hell Creek, a gang of fossil freaks think they may have just gotten a major break. Bill Garstka is the paleontologist in charge of the dig, so he's going to fill us in on the find.
This was the first piece of bone that I picked up at the site. This is distal end of fibula, small bone of the leg. So it sits something like this into the ankle of the animal. And it's interesting in several respects. First of all, you see this iron core in the middle? Carnivorous dinosaur bones are hollow. This was the first indication that I had something really interesting. We hadn't been here, even 10 minutes picking up fragments when Sean, who's the group leader, found this. This is a Tyrannosaurus tooth, and this has the enamel weathered off, but it still has the ridges where the serrations on the enamel would have been. So we knew with these two pieces that we had a tyrannosaur.
Making the ID was the easy part. Even with power tools, there's still plenty of backbreaking work to do on a dino dig. Because even if lugging boulders isn't your thing, there's more than enough delicate dirt picking and fossil dusting to keep you busy. In fact, it's such precise work that digging up an entire skeleton can take years. Hope they brought something to read. The final step, just like it was back in Barnum Brown's day, is wrapping the bones in those snuggly plaster jackets. and then, gently, oh so gently, rolling them over.
Okay. All right, good. I got it.
And hauling them off to start their new life here in the 21st century.
Hey! We're back in the court of the tyrant lizard king. Next, we're gonna see just what T-Rex's world looked like. So, naturally, I'm keeping a low profile.
Just one look at that terrain, and it's obvious how today's Badlands got their name. Thanks to fossil leaf expert Kirk Johnson, we know that T Rex was roaming much greener pastures.
My concern is the world of T Rex. What plants did it live with? What sort of foliage hid it while it stalked its prey? What had happened is the flowering plants appeared early in the Cretaceous period, and by the time of Tyrannosaurus rex, they were dominating the world's ecosystems. We find in North Dakota that 90% of our fossil leaves, and we now have over 30,000 fossil leaves collected, over 90% of those fossil leaves are broadleaf flowering plant leaves. What you see are here broadleaf relatives of the laurel and cinnamon, relatives, two-lobed relatives of magnolia, relatives of the modern sycamore, relatives of the modern elm.
Hey, what about conifers, Kirk? Any of those around?
There's still a few conifers around in the time of Tyrannosaurus rex, the bald cypress and its relatives. But the look of the place was similar to, say, perhaps Florida or southern Georgia, where you have relatively small trees, maybe 30, 40, 50 feet tall, trunks no more than maybe a foot in diameter.
So even if you decided to head straight to the source and jumped in the ultimate guide to the awesome's way back in time machine and took off for the time of T-Rex, you'd probably feel right at home. Just ask Phil Curry.
By the time Tyrannosaurus was living in North America, most of the modern families of plants and animals had already appeared on the Earth. Consequently, the world that Tyrannosaurus lived in may not have been as foreign as we think it is. In fact, we can almost go to parts of the world today and see representatives of those animals and plants still alive today. And you would have crocodiles and turtles and lizards and snakes and all these things. But they would have been very familiar to us today. The difference would have been that the large animals, which today are large mammals, at that time would have been dinosaurs.
Just like with mammals today, there were a lot more vegetarian dinos than meat eaters like the T-Rex, which was just fine with the Lizard King, because when the plant eaters headed out for a leafy snack, T-Rex was probably right there, ready to attack. One of his favorite meals was raw Edmontosaur. And Phil Curry is here with a team that might have discovered some of T-Rex's Edmontosaur leftovers.
Oh, we've got about, I'd say 65 or so Tyrannosaur teeth, a few small theropods, lots of tooth-marked bone as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's enough Edmontosaurus material in here to indicate that this was a herd of Edmontosaurs?
Well, we've got at least 8 individuals, 8 big Edmontosaurs, but we also have evidence of some very small animals based on some of the lower limb bones. So it appears like we've got older adults with smaller individuals, which to me indicates we may have had a herd in this area.
Bone beds like this are a pretty good indication that many of the prey species for animals like Tyrannosaurus rex were in fact herding animals. These animals were herding probably because they were moving from region to region as food resources changed over the course of the year. I would suspect that the Tyrannosaurs were in fact following these herds, and that the old individuals and that the young individuals that strayed too far from the herds were the most likely prey for the Tyrannosaurs, and these are the animals they actively hunted down.
So even in the safety of a herd, peaceful plant eaters like the Edmontosaurs had to watch their back. Because, guys, I think you better step on it. Never mind. Now, there's no doubt that T-Rex is one of the most infamous characters in the history of prehistory. But glory and glamour didn't come overnight. Rex paid his dues with millions of years of evolution before beginning his reign of terror. Believe it or not, the biggest player of them all got his start in Little League. This mini monster is T-Rex's oldest relative, and Paleontologist Paul Serino is going to give us the heads up.
This is Eoraptor, or the dawn stealer. It's the oldest and first predatory dinosaur that we know of in the fossil record. And it has some of the basic adaptations that were to carry predatory dinosaurs through 150 million years of evolution to something like the Tyrannosaurus behind me. The skull shows some of the classic features of the predatory dinosaurs. One of those features involves the lower jaw. At the midpoint of the lower jaw, there's a joint that allowed the lower jaw to flex. And this kind of a lower jaw is present in Tyrannosaurus. It's present in every other predatory dinosaur that we know of. And Eoraptor is the first to show that adaptation in the fossil record.
Little Eoraptor's body design became one of Mother Nature's all-time greatest hits. Just have a look at the bird in your local tree. That Stone Age skeleton is still rocking on in our feathered friends of today. But how did he do it? How did a dino the size of a wiener dog grow into a 40-foot ferocious fright? Well, for a long time, scientists thought the T Rex was descended from one of the other giant meat-eaters, like this Allosaurus. The theory was, T Rex was the last in a line of big, toothy terrorizers. This was called the super carnosaur hypothesis. And even though the idea seemed like it was right on, it turned out to be dead wrong.
We used to have very simple views about how the different groups of meat-eating dinosaurs were related to each other. In recent years, though, as we've discovered more and more about the anatomy, these views have changed. Tyrannosaurus at one time was considered to be a carnosaur, that is, one of the large meat-eating forms, and by its size it was related to animals like Allosaurus. But in recent years, as we started to look more closely at the anatomy, there were a lot of things about tyrannosaurs that did not fit that picture. One example is the foot. And if we look at this pinched out third toe, in fact, this is the kind of characteristic we see in many of the other late Cretaceous dinosaurs, but all of them are small dinosaurs. They're not these big meat eaters that we're so familiar with, animals like Allosaurus. Looking at the foot and a whole suite of other characters in the skeleton, we now realize that tyrannosaurs are in fact small meat-eating dinosaurs that have grown extremely large, and they're not related to the other meat-eating dinosaurs that are large at all.
For Phil and his fellow experts, identifying dinosaurs that aren't related to T-Rex is a piece of prehistoric cake. But finding the dino links between the big fella and the little Eoraptor, it's enough to make a paleontologist give up dessert. What they needed was for someone to find new fossils that could fill that gap. Things looked pretty dark. Until some dino diggers saw the light, up in Canada. 4,000 feet up in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, to be exact. And they learned what it was like to walk a mile in a dinosaur's shoes. Believe it or not, during the dino days, this mountainside used to be a beach. And all those marks that look like footprints in the sand? That's exactly what they are. The story of the dino's day at the seaside had been preserved in the sands of time. And with the help of some modern-day mountain climbing gear, Phil Curry is going to rappel into the past and dust the mountain for prints. Footprints, that is.
The richest dinosaur footprint site in all of Canada is in a coal mine in Grand Cache, Alberta. In these 100-million-year-old rocks, we have evidence of armored dinosaurs, meat-eating dinosaurs of different kinds, and large plant-eating dinosaurs. The footprints are all in trackways, and they go across this enormous cliff face, which at one time must have been a mud flat at the edge of the sea. What's important about this site is that because of the age, 100 million years ago, we don't have equivalent bone sites in this part of the world. And so we have to do a little bit of guesswork in terms of identifying the dinosaurs. And I don't think there's any question at all that these are not tyrannosaur tracks. But their long, slender toes suggest to me that these were made by giant coelurosaurs. And we feel these days that giant Coelurosaurs may have been the ancestor of Tyrannosaurus rex.
The main reason Phil thinks Coelurosaur and T Rex were related is their bite, making Coelurosaur a major stop along toothy T Rex's evolution highway. Coelurosaur was the first small predator to use its jaws to kill, instead of its front limbs. But where did evolution head from there? Well, experts say straight to the first true tyrannosaur, called Electrosaurus. Papa Electro looked a lot like T Rex, except he had a long, slender body and longer front limbs. By the time Albertosaurus evolved, those limbs were shorter, and he'd gotten a big head. Phil Currie knows Rexy's whole family tree, from the roots up.
There were certainly many species of tyrannosaurs. We at present know of more than half a dozen species. The earliest fossil record of Albertosaurus is about 80 million years old. This animal in its external features really isn't all that different from Tyrannosaurus rex, but when you start looking at specific characteristics, there are features which suggest it is more primitive than Tyrannosaurus rex itself.
Not bad, Albert, but you're still no T-Rex. Hey, we're back on the Cretaceous trail of the audacious tale of Tyrannosaurus rex. And we better keep moving, because if you want to keep up with this race of dinos, you gotta be on your mark, get set. Like a lot of bruisers, T-Rex has to fight the stereotype of being clumsy as an ox. Luckily, Phil Currie doesn't believe the hype.
From this position, one gets a sense of what an enormous animal Tyrannosaurus rex really is. In fact, this animal is so big and so massive that for a long time, everybody thought that this had to be a slow-moving animal. In recent years, though, we've been looking more closely at the anatomy of the hind leg of these dinosaurs, and what we see is not necessarily what we expected to see. The relative proportions of the individual leg bones of Tyrannosaurus give us an idea of how fast this animal could be. Now, in fast-moving animals like ostriches, the upper leg bone is relatively short compared to the lower leg bones. In Tyrannosaurus, we see the same kind of pattern. Lower bones are as long or longer than the upper bones. This continues, in fact, down into the foot, where if we look at the flat of the foot, or what would be the flat of the foot in a human being, this unit is also very long. All in all, then, if we look at the characters that we see in the hind legs of Tyrannosaurus, I don't think there's any question at all that, in spite of its massive size, this is an animal that was built for speed, and it's an animal that, in fact, could outrun any of its potential prey in its world.
Not so fast, my friend. Not all experts agree with Phil. Paleontologist Jack Horner has also been boning up on anatomy, and he even doubts T-Rex could give you a run for your money.
If we look at the leg bones of a meat-eating dinosaur named Troodon, what we see is a thigh bone and a shin bone that have different lengths. We see that the thigh bone is shorter than the shin bone. And this is true of every single one of the non-tyrannosaurs. We see the same thing in ostriches, we see the same thing in emus and rheas and all these running birds. Animals that run fast have a short thigh bone and a long shin bone. The primitive feature is running. That means in evolution, you have to evolve legs for walking, because there were no dinosaurs that were adapted for walking before we get to the tyrannosaurs. If we look at tyrannosaurs, the thigh bone and the shin bone are either the same length or the thigh bone is slightly longer than the shin bone. This is a feature that is good for walking.
Man, sounds like we need some more evidence. Luckily, we've got some. Out here on the high plains of New Mexico, in that truck, is a paleontologist by the name of Martin Lockley. And when I say he's on the trail of T-Rex, I mean he's on the trail of T-Rex. You see, Martin's a fossilized footprint expert. He's studied thousands of them all over North America. But the one he's going to show us now leaves them all in the fossil dust. It's so rare that its location is top secret.
We're inside a high security area in the New Mexico backcountry. This fenced enclosure contains this extraordinary and unique fossil footprint. This is the only Tyrannosaurus footprint anywhere in the world. This footprint was probably made not far from some river in the mud, and then it was filled in when the river flooded and washed a sheet of sand over this trampled area. This is the casting that was filled in by sand, now sandstone. This track is on the order of 3 feet long, it's 2 feet wide, and it's almost a foot deep. This was made by an animal that probably weighed in at around 5 tons. It's sitting on a block that's about 9 feet long. There isn't a second footprint in that space, so that this means a minimum step of about 9 feet. And if we calculate or estimate the speed of this animal, it was probably moving along at least 11 kilometers, something like 6 or 7 miles per hour, which is a pretty good clip. It would be a jog for a human being.
Next, our quest to clock T-Rex's running speed zips over to the local zoo. Flightless birds, like these emus, can help answer the question of how T-Rex walked the walk. But not until paleontologist and bird lover Jim Farlow catches them.
It would be nice to know what Tyrannosaurus was like as a living animal, but it's very inconveniently extinct. And if you want to get a picture of how it moved, what it might have been like when it was alive, it's helpful to look at modern animals that give us an approximation to something like Tyrannosaurus. And of such modern animals, I think the emu is about as good a model as one could hope to find. I suspect it's probably faster than Tyrannosaurus was. An emu in the wild can go, 50, maybe 60 kilometers an hour. Tyrannosaurus, obviously, we've no direct way of determining how fast it could go. But based on the calculations of the strength of its bones relative to the size of the animal, I would think that a good ballpark figure for the top speed of Tyrannosaurus might be something on the order of 30, 40 kilometers per hour.
That's about 18 to 25 miles an hour, for you dinosaurs who haven't gone metric yet.
If you look at the way this emu walks, the way it puts its feet one in front of the other, it's a striding walker. It doesn't hop like a kangaroo. And if you look at the way it picks up its feet as it goes, I think this is about as close to a Tyrannosaurus as we can find in our modern world. And that's part of the fascination that emus have for me.
Emus might tell Jim the whole story, but other experts think the secret to T-Rex's speed is hidden somewhere else. Stephen Gatesy tells the tale of another dino cousin.
The animal I have here, and the reason I think crocodilians are worth spending a lot of time looking at, this is a saltwater crocodile, and it retains many of the features that we think the primitive dinosaur ancestor might have had. We know that birds and crocodilians are dinosaurs' closest living relatives, and so they're the logical place to look for information on how T-Rex works. The muscle that I've spent a lot of time looking at originates from the side of the tail. As you can see, crocodilians have a long, heavy muscular tail. And along here where my fingers are is a large muscle that runs forward to attach onto the thigh bone, the femur. What we see in modern birds is that the tail itself has been reduced dramatically. Most of what we see in a bird tail is actually just feathers rather than muscle and bone.
Thanks to this X-ray movie, we can see how differently crocs and birds walk. And it's all because of the tail. Isn't that right, Steve?
What we're seeing in the X-ray films is that crocodilians and birds have very distinctive ways of moving their legs. The question was, which of those patterns can we apply back to a dinosaur like Tyrannosaurus? Birds use a lot of knee movement. The hip is very, very stable, whereas in crocodilians they're using lots of hip movement, and that seems to be driven by this muscle running from the tail to the thigh bone. Fortunately for this muscle, there's a very distinct scar, a bony attachment on the thigh bone that we can see in fossils like in T-Rex, suggesting that that muscle existed and probably was working in a similar way in these forms.
What I'm suggesting is that in Tyrannosaurus we have a unique combination of features. A tail that's more similar to what we see in crocodilians, and yet a bird-like lower limb. So a bird knee, a bird ankle, and a bird foot with a kind of crocodilian hips. And so in Tyrannosaurus rex, I'm predicting then we would have a unique combination of features, working in a way unlike any other living animal today.
That's a lot of good info. So let's wake up the Mega Magnifier to put Steve's words into pictures. See? There's the big crocodilian hip muscle he was talking about. Put it together with those bird-like legs and feet, add a big muscular tail on the end, and you get a T-Rex, a one-of-a-kind walking wonder. By studying modern animals, like crocodiles and emus, experts can also guess at what T-Rex's family life was like. It looks like this giant got his start in a nest full of eggs. Paleontologist Ken Carpenter has some high cholesterol fossils that might just prove it.
I have in front of me some dinosaur eggs from China, and these are very elongated, kind of the shape that we would expect for Tyrannosaurus rex. To give you a feel for its size, I have here a chicken egg.
Yep, looks like a chicken egg to me.
But what's really exciting and very rare is this clutch of eggs here, which are very badly crushed, but we do have an embryo that's lying here. We can see the eye socket, the skull, the backbone in here, the pelvis, the hind leg. This embryo is about the size that we would expect for a Tyrannosaurus rex. We can imagine this hatchling coming out of the egg and scurrying off into the underbrush, or possibly, if there was parental care, it may have scurried off and joined its parents.
Mom? Where are you? I'm lost.
Junior!
Mama? I'm coming! I'm coming! Mama!
There you are. I was worried sick.
Can we rule the Cretaceous now?
As soon as I clean up the nest.
Okay, Mama.
Lunchtime. Whoa. Man, I could have sworn there was half a tuna sandwich in here. Because, you know, with all this traveling back in time, I'm famished. Well, it's a good thing we're hanging with T-Rex then, because you know he liked his portions large. If you happen to be a dino back in the days of T-Rex, most of the experts agree you lived your life hoping the biggest hunter of them all didn't track you down and eat you up. But there's one bone hunter out there that's talking a little trash. Trash picking, that is. He says T-Rex wasn't a killer, but a big, scaly dino scavenger. Who is this rebel? None other than Jack Horner.
There's a controversy right now, of which I seem to be to be one side of, and almost everyone else in paleontology seems to be at the other side of. And this has to do with Tyrannosaurus rex being a predator or a scavenger. A predator, we have to remember, is actually a hunter, and a scavenger is the kind of animal that only eats dead things. We look down upon scavenging. Tyrannosaurus rex, we hate to think about Tyrannosaurus rex as a scavenger. We'd rather think of it as a predator. Its name, the Tyrant Lizard King. You can't have a king that's a scavenger.
I see. And what about T-Rex's eyes, Jack?
A hunter should have big eyes. It should have good eyesight. And if we look at the brain case, or if we look at T-Rex, the biggest lobe of the brain, the actual big openings in the brain, are for the sense of smell. And because we can actually carve out the area where the brain was, we can CAT scan it, we can do all sorts of things to it, we actually can make a model of what the brain would look like. We see the optic lobe is right here, it's very small, and the olfactory lobe is this huge thing at the front end of the brain. This is huge. This means that Tyrannosaurus had a very, very, very good sense of smell and not very good eyesight. This is contradictory to a hunter. This is what scavengers have.
Pretty convincing stuff, eh, Rexy? But is it true? Was your mega schnoz really for sniffing out the prehistoric leftovers? Phil Curry is back to say no way. And he's getting into T-Rex's head to prove it.
The skull of Tyrannosaurus is very narrow in the snout region, which allows the eyes to face forward, giving it stereoscopic vision. In addition to that, the ears themselves are located in such a way that they should be able to pick up sounds in particular directions. The ears may not look very different from the other carnivorous dinosaurs externally, but internally there are a lot of changes that have taken place. This gives Tyrannosaurus Rex a greater range of hearing capabilities. That is, the frequencies that it could hear were lower than what most other dinosaurs could. Since Tyrannosaurus was probably hunting other dinosaurs, which were animals that probably made low sounds, the changes in the ear would allow it to hear those animals better and to hunt them down.
Yep, old Rex likes the sound of that theory a whole lot more. And that means those poor plant eaters better make tracks. But Jack Horner's not backing down. He's got yet another bone to pick with T-Rex, the so-called hunter.
The size of the tyrannosaur is advantageous for a scavenger. The bigger you are, the better chance you have of chasing away another animal that may have made a kill. Even the short little arms. A T-Rex doesn't have anything for grabbing, and we're bipedal. We know that if we're going to go out and catch a chicken, we don't want to have our hands tied behind us. All of the features that we see all suggest that Tyrannosaurus and the tyrannosaurs in general were scavengers.
It's just so hard to believe that the king would let a little guy like this do his killing for him. But hey, the paleo surveillance camera doesn't lie. Or does it? Phil Curry says hunter, and he's not backing down from this fight.
When I look in the jaws of Tyrannosaurus Rex, I have little doubt about its predatory capabilities. These are jaws that are meant to do some pretty nasty work. Like other carnivorous animals, Tyrannosaurus Rex has teeth that are curved backwards. And at the same time, the tips of the teeth, in fact, curve towards the center of the mouth as well. What this means is that these teeth are specialized in such a way that if the prey is in the mouth and is struggling, the only way for it to escape, really, is to go back further into the throat.
From what I know about dino digestion, that route was a dead end.
Because tyrannosaur teeth are so tall, they have to have a very deep root, and this gives them the strength so that the tooth is unlikely to break and also has the strength to puncture right through bone. And this is the reason that tyrannosaur jaws are so deep. Almost 2/3 the length of the tooth is in fact root. There are these very fine serrations that run down the front of the tooth and the back of the tooth. These serrations function as little hooks, and as the tooth is driven through the meat, the hooks hook the fibers of meat and take it between the serrations. And between the serrations you have razor-sharp edges that cut those fibers. Now if we shift to the inside of the jaw, we can see that there are some very powerful muscle attachments here, going from the top down through this region, and this gives a muscle mass that fills in this whole area. These muscles allow the animal to close its jaws on very large animals and deliver a powerful bite very rapidly. And it would have no trouble at all cutting an animal such as myself in half in one single bite.
Tasty stuff. But Jack Horner's cooking up his own theory.
We can say that Tyrannosaurus basically had a mouthful of steak knives. And if you have a mouthful of steak knives, obviously you eat steak, which is meat. We know that Tyrannosaurs ate meat. We know that they ate dinosaurs because we have evidence. This is a piece of a fibula, a shin bone from a duck-billed dinosaur, and this shin bone actually has gouges, tooth marks, from being bitten by a tyrannosaur. And what's really interesting, it has a puncture mark in it, and in that puncture mark within the bone is actually the tip of a tyrannosaur tooth. So this is absolute proof that tyrannosaurs ate meat, that they ate other dinosaurs. But what it is not is evidence that the tyrannosaur killed this particular animal.
But when Ken Carpenter looks at another duckbill skeleton, he sees something else. He says the evidence proves that T Rex was ready, willing, and able to take down live prey.
I've been involved in a bit of detective work with this skeleton, mostly centered around the damaged area in this part of the tail. If we look here, we'll see that part of this spine is missing. And it turns out that there's a very nice groove here that if I were to take a Tyrannosaurus tooth, we find that it fits very well in that groove. Most likely then that this part of the vertebrae was bitten off by a Tyrannosaurus Rex that was attacking from the right rear. Now, interestingly, we have regrowth of bone around this spine as well as around some of the tooth puncture marks on these adjacent ones, indicating that this animal survived the attack. And the only animal that was big enough living at this time with jaws powerful enough to have sheared through this bone would have been a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And I think it shows conclusively that Tyrannosaurus Rex was a predator and not a scavenger as some have thought.
Man, it's hard to know who to believe. But if Ken is right, we would have seen action like this. These duckbills are just looking for some tasty leaves, but a certain top predator I know is hungry too. And the Lizard King is on their tail. Literally. Better luck next time, Rex.
Well, big guy, I guess this is it, huh? You had a heck of a run, but now it's time to say goodbye. That's right. It's time for T Rex to come face to face with the ultimate predator. Extinction.
And what's the best place to get the bad news? The Badlands, of course. This is where paleontologists like Elizabeth McIver are digging up clues about how T Rex became extinct. She says the answer is hidden in something called the Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary.
Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary is well defined in this outcrop right here where we've been digging. Well, the actual boundary is known from a very narrow band of clay that was laid down 65 million years ago.
Okay, you see it there? That band of clay is how experts can mark the change from the time of the dinosaurs, called the Cretaceous period, to the time of the mammals, known to us mammals as the Tertiary period. Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary. What does it tell us, Elizabeth?
It tells us that something very specific happened at that time, in geological time.
In that clay is something called iridium. It's totally rare. We know an asteroid brought it here when it smashed into our planet. It also brought this question for experts like Elizabeth. Did the impact cause the extinction of the dinosaurs? The plant life sure didn't do too well.
The fossil plants below the boundary tell us that there were lush forests existing in this region and throughout the prairie regions that we know as we know them today before the boundary. And right before the boundary, in some sediments that I have studied, we have a very typical cypress swamp, such as the bald cypress swamp that you would find down in southern parts of the United States. And above the boundary, there are no cypress trees. There's nothing in those remains above the boundary that tell us the cypress swamp was around. It was gone. So something happened at that boundary that was very dramatic. It leveled the forest. The standing vegetation was literally clear-cut in a sense.
If T-Rex was around the day that the asteroid came crashing down, and he got a chance to watch one of the most devastating events the world has ever seen. And it was the last thing he ever saw. Ever since Barnum Brown dug up that first skeleton 100 years ago, the Badlands have been giving us crucial clues about how the mighty T-Rex lived and died. But we still haven't uncovered enough evidence to solve all the mysteries about the family of Tyrannosaurus. Who were these prehistoric kings? And why did they die out? You know, come to think of it, we haven't solved any mysteries about the Tyrannosaurus, now have we? But the more we find out, the better the story gets. At the end of the day, we can only imagine what life was like in the shadowy kingdom of Tyrannosaurus Rex. Man, talk about your evil eye. Looks like T-Rex wasn't too happy about old extinction knocking on his door. But hey, 3 million years isn't too shabby when it comes to world domination. The dinos had their time, and now humans like you and me rule the show. And if T-Rex has a problem with that, well, that's too bad. The dude's extinct. Whoa, what was that?